honored guest today. Edward Lucas has really been a beacon in the community of journalists and analysts who have followed events in this region and are concerned about its fate. He has written for The Economist, has spoken and written elsewhere as well, with great clarity, with great purpose, with great courage, if I may say. Not afraid to go against the grain, not afraid to speak his mind when the winds are blowing in a different direction. But looking back, he's been right so often that it is really a testament to his intelligent observation of things, not only in your country, but in your region, particularly behaviors emanating from Moscow. So it is really my pleasure. I realize his time is limited and your time is limited as well. I cannot think, Edward, of a better audience for you right at this moment than these future journalists of Ukraine. This is the future of independent journalism in this country. And they understand English very well, and they understand journalism as well. So thank you for being with us.
Super. Well, thanks very much, Mark, and it's great to be back here at UKU. I have been a friend of Bishop Boris since 1986, when we were students together in Krakow, in Poland, learning Polish. And I've been following the development of UKU since it was starting in a room not much bigger than this one. So it's been wonderful to see the huge expansion in size and in ambition, and I'm delighted to do anything I can to help UKU and help its students. So please don't hesitate to follow up if we don't touch on every subject in the next hour or so. And there's a question you want to ask me, just email me or send me a message on Twitter. I'm very easy to find, and I'll be happy to help on that. Well, I need some water at some point. I'm sorry I'm a bit hoarse. I gave a speech last night to open the Lviv Security Forum, and I used up most of my voice there, but what I've got left I dedicate to you. So this phrase, the New Cold War, used to be really controversial. And when I wrote my book, The New Cold War, in 2007, people thought I was pretty crazy, really. They said that the old Cold War had been a very specific period in history, a conflict between a totalitarian ideology and a totalitarian empire on one side and the West on the other. And clearly Russia was not the Soviet Union. Russia, insofar as it had any ideology at all, certainly didn't have a communist one. And so therefore to talk of any kind of new Cold War was nonsense. And I guess since then, the main thing in the 10, 11 years since then, is that people now accept, first of all, that we do have a serious problem with Russia. And I'm pleased about that. There's more joy in heaven over one sinner that repents than over 99 that already know the kingdom of heaven. So I'm glad that that message has got through. And people realise that we have both a clash of interests and a clash of ideas with Russia. The clash of interests, as you feel very strongly here in Ukraine, is that Russia doesn't believe that its neighbours have the right to make their own choices about their economic, political, and most of all security orientation. And we in the West believe that very strongly. We think you absolutely have the right to make your own decisions. Don't worry at all about being late. Hello, there's a lovely chair right here at the back. There's also a lovely chair in there as well. So that's the first of all is one clash of interests, the belief in the neighbour's autonomy and the right for you to make your decisions. There's also a clash of interests in that we believe in the rules-based multilateral order. We believe in the EU and in NATO and the WTO and the OECD and all these big multilateral organisations. And Russia basically doesn't like that multilateral world order. They think that these rules were written at a time when Russia was weak, that Russia didn't have a proper part in the shaping of these rules, and that the way these rules are implemented is unfair on Russia. And so Russia doesn't want to live in a multilateral world. It wants to live in a bilateral world, because in any bilateral relationship, Russia, as a big country, will have a lot to say. Even dealing with America, Russia is something of a bilateral partner. Dealing with Germany, Russia is a bilateral partner. Dealing with any country smaller than that, Russia is probably going to be the bigger and stronger partner. So Russia wants a world based on bilateral relationships, not a world based on multilateral organisations and multilateral rules. So those are the clash of interests. But I think there is a clash of ideology. We believed, I think, rather too easily in 1991 that history had come to an end. And, oh, thank you so much, sorry. Just keep it going. No, I don't need glasses, I'll just save the glasses. We believed rather too easily that liberal democracy had won indefinitely and forever, and that nothing was going to be able to attack democracy. And it's absolutely clear that this assumption was mistaken. There's lots of ways of attacking democracy. You can attack democracy through propaganda, you can attack democracy through money, you can attack democracy through the manipulation of elections, through cyber attacks. So there's lots of ways in democracy can be attacked. And you can also attack the whole idea of democracy. And this is certainly what Putin, the Putin regime were doing, and also what the Chinese regime were doing. They're saying to us, yes, you have your way of doing things, it doesn't work, our way is better. And it's a pretty head-on challenge, very clearly articulated from the Chinese, who just say the Chinese system develops, it guarantees stability and economic development in a way that the Western system doesn't, but also pretty much the same message coming from Putin, that all your talk of the rule of law and human rights is just a sham, you're basically no better than we are, you just dress it up better. So an attack on the whole idea of Western values, Western principles, and the idea that the West actually believes in its own values. So these are the two clashes, the clashes of interests and the clashes of ideas. And we're beginning to wake up to that. That's good. I think that you go to most countries, most people dealing with security in most Western countries, and there's an understanding that we face a serious problem from Russia, and down the line a serious problem from China. So then the question becomes, what is the shape of this problem? What's the point we really have to worry about? And we're waking up on this too. We've woken up, I would say, most clearly on what you might call the kinetic side, the idea of that there's a military threat. Now, this was absolutely not understood only 10, 12 years ago. The idea that Russia was able to attack any of its neighbours militarily was seen as ridiculous. The Russian Navy had only 20 seaworthy major surface ships. The Russian Navy was a bit of a joke, the Russian Army was a bit of a joke, the Russian Air Force was a bit of a joke, Russian nuclear forces were a bit of a joke. And so when people like me in 2004, 2005, 2006 were saying, you know what, actually the Baltic states are quite vulnerable, it would be a good idea to have some plans about how to reinforce the Baltic states in the event of a crisis. The Russian military is pretty strong on Crimea. Do we have any plans about what to do if the Russians were to seize Crimea? The Russians are building things up in the Arctic. Do we have any plans in the Arctic? And this basically got you laughed at. The main thing for NATO was what they called out of area. They had this phrase, out of area or out of business. So it was Afghanistan and Iraq, counter-terrorism. These are the main, almost the only European and American security priorities. A little bit of worry about the South China Sea. And that changed. It changed with the war in Georgia in 2008, and it changed even more when we had the big military exercises of Ladoga and Zapad 09 in 2009, because these were military exercises of a kind we'd never seen before. They were really good. The Russians moved large numbers of men and equipment, I guess some women as well, but in the Russian army it's mostly men. Men and equipment, they moved large numbers over long distances very quickly and very efficiently. And they rehearsed a very worrying scenario, the invasion and occupation of part of the Baltic states, and they finished up with a nuclear weapons drill. And that was a real wake-up call for NATO. That was like a big bucket of cold water with ice in it. And NATO realised we needed to do something, and we've done it. We've done a lot in the Baltic states. We have the enhanced forward presence there. Estonia is run by the Brits, Latvia is run by the Canadians, and Lithuania is run by the Germans, in America, in Poland it's run by the Americans. We have the capability to reinforce the Baltic states pretty quickly in the event of a crisis, and we have lots of exercises. There's a really, really big NATO exercise going on right now in Norway called Trident Juncture. It's not secret, you can Google it. It's the biggest NATO exercise since the end of the Cold War, involving something like 20 NATO countries. Really complicated, going really well. And that's great, I'm really pleased. We've solved the 2009 problem. Have we solved the 2019 problem? I'm less sure about that. We've also woken up to the problem of the use of information. Now again, 15, 20 years ago, if you said we need to worry about Russian propaganda, people laughed. I was literally laughed at in the British Ministry of Defence in 2009 when I said we have to worry about Russian propaganda attacks in this country. And they said, yeah, Russian propaganda, yeah, maybe in the Baltic states or somewhere like that, but in Britain, are you joking? And I said, no, I'm not joking, watch out, they will do it. They will do it with social media. They will buy adverts on social media. We won't know who's buying the adverts, we won't know who's seeing the adverts, and they will reach targeted groups of voters in this country, and they will try and affect our politics. And the Ministry of Defence just laughed at me. Well, they're not laughing now. We've seen the way that Russian propaganda can send direct, targeted information attacks into the heart of Western political systems. Sometimes it's by these buying social media ads. Sometimes it's also through these hacking and leaking operations, the idea that you use rather primitive cyber attacks to steal information, and then you leak that information into the public over the internet in order to achieve a political effect. Well, we were warning about that back in, I was warning about that back in 2009, when the Russians first started doing it with bugging and leaking attacks aimed at diplomats. And if you look back, you'll find there are examples of a Lithuanian ambassador to Armenia and a Lithuanian ambassador to Azerbaijan. And they were phoning each other and saying, which of us has a worse country to deal with? And the ambassador to Azerbaijan said, no, my country is much worse. The Azeris are totally unreasonable. And the ambassador to Armenia was saying, no, you've no idea, the Armenians are far worse than the Azeris. And then they were kind of joking in a way. It was a completely legitimate private conversation. The Russians bugged it and leaked it. And I'm afraid the Lithuanians, anyone here from Lithuania? That's good, okay. The Lithuanians did the wrong thing. They should have told the Russians to get stuffed. They should have said, we encourage our ambassadors to have a sense of humour. It's their human right to have a private conversation. We don't even necessarily believe that this is an accurate reflection of what they said, because you could have edited it. Now please go away and stop interfering, instead of which they fired the diplomats or transferred them to other people. So we saw back then, some of you, if you know Poland, you'll remember the Afera Tasmowa, the bugging of Polish politicians. Again, that was a hacking and leaking attack. And it was absolutely obvious to me that we'd seen this there, we'd seen it here, we'd seen it in the Baltic states, we'd seen it in other countries. It was only a matter of time before they would do this in Western countries. And they did. And this came as a big surprise, a very unpleasant surprise. But we've now woken up. We now understand that there are things called information attacks, and the Russians do them. So I'm glad about that. We worked out 10 years too late, we worked it out. We've also realised that we have energy as a political weapon. Again, 2003, 2004, I was trying to, I don't want to make up, I'm wrong on a lot of things as well, so don't worry, but on these things I was right, so these are the ones I'm telling you about. I was telling the Germans in 2003, 2004, you need to watch out, because you have a very high level of gas dependency on Russia, and the Russians can use this in a bad way. They will use it to establish political influence in Germany, and they may use it to exert political pressure through supply interruptions. And I still remember sitting in the German economics ministry in Berlin in 2003 and being told, sorry, Mr. Lucas, do you really think that gas is a political weapon? And I said, you bet. I've seen it used as a political weapon. I've seen it used as a political weapon in the Baltics. I've seen it used as a political weapon in Ukraine. I've seen it used as a political weapon in Moldova, in Georgia, and all these other countries. They will use it here too. And now, of course, everyone understands that gas can be used as a political weapon. And the EU's done a really good job on this. We've got the North-South gas grid, we've had unbundling, we've had the third energy package, had a whole range of things. The Competition Commission attacked Gazprom and has forced Gazprom to change its business model. We don't have country-by-country pricing anymore. We have better storage, better data. So all the problems that we saw in Europe 10 years ago would be much harder for the Russians to create now. That's good. So we kind of get it on energy. Still a few things to do. I'm not happy about Nord Stream 2, obviously, and there's a few details to tie up. But we've got that as well. We've pretty much got the idea of cyber. Now, again, people didn't understand that they used to say the Russians would never conduct a cyber attack against the West because it would be too risky. Too much would go wrong. Why would they expose themselves to this sort of international hostility? And now, after NotPetya, which was aimed at you but also hit us, we see that Russia does launch cyber attacks, and they're very irresponsible and very damaging, and we get very cross about them. So we call them out on that. We've woken up to Russian spies. Again, this was a huge problem 10, 15 years ago, getting our counterintelligence services to take Russian spies seriously, because we thought they were very low down the list of priorities compared with the Chinese or with terrorism. And since Salisbury particularly, the use of a nerve agent to attack people in Britain, and one person died, everybody now knows about the GRU. That's good, I'm glad about that. And we see huge amounts of money and effort being put into counter-espionage and counterintelligence. We see people being brought out of retirement. Interestingly, some people who were fired in the 1990s because they were regarded as obsessive on Russia, and their careers came to a premature end, and now being brought back into Western counterintelligence, counter-espionage, because we realise we still need their expertise, so I'm pleased about that too. So that's all the good news, but then, as I said, these are all the previous problems. It's a bit like driving a car, and you're getting really good at looking in the mirror and seeing who's following you and what you just drove over. And this is good. You say, I thought that was a pothole. It wasn't a pothole, it was a log that we just drove over. That's what that log was. And yes, there are 3 white larders all following us. Well, I'm glad we know how to use the mirrors. But I want to use the windscreen. I think we need to look and see what's happening ahead of us, because the story of the past 27 years, perhaps even the stories before that, is we are constantly caught by surprise. We didn't see Gorbachev coming, we didn't see the Soviet Union collapsing, we didn't see the Chechen war, we didn't see Putin coming, we didn't see the Russia's economic boom, we didn't see the war in Georgia, we didn't see the attack on hysteria in 2007, we didn't see the attack on Ukraine, we didn't see the information attacks on the Western political system. It's not one of these things that the West has managed to see in advance. So I think the betting has to be that the next thing is going to catch us by surprise as well. And that bothers us, because each of these things do damage. We catch up in the end, but they're worrying. So what, actually wrote out a long speech, which I've not actually read any of, but don't worry, I think what I said was probably more interesting. So what should we be worried about? What are the new things? So we'll hear a couple. One is, I think, that we are underestimating the role of money. I think that at the heart of all these influence operations, all this hybrid warfare, there's always money. Money supporting the oligarchs, the oligarchic relationships in Ukraine. Money is the sinews of power. It's where power really flows, is through financial and economic relationships. Russia's really good at doing that. They understand the Western financial system really well. They understand how to exploit it. They understand how to use it to disguise the way that money flows. They can use anonymous companies They can use corrupt bankers and lawyers and accountants in the West to conceal what they're doing. They understand the financial system actually better than many Western security experts understand the Western financial system. If you talk to Western security experts, they're pretty good now on energy and cyber and propaganda and defence spending and the INF Treaty and do we need more nuclear weapons. Yeah, that is the vocabulary, the grammar of security. And our security policy experts are pretty good on it. And when you start saying to them, what can we do to stop Russia using commodity markets and insider trading on commodity markets in order to put money in the pockets of their political assets overseas, people look pretty black. Because most Western security policy experts, most Western journalists writing about security, have no idea how the financial system operates. If you want to do that, you'd be a financial journalist. Well, I'm sorry, we've got to learn this stuff. If you don't know it already, start learning it. Find out why IOSCO failed to reform the commodity markets. Find out why the Levin bill never went through the Senate. Find out why shell companies are so easy to set up and so hard to crack. Find out why the Financial Action Task Force failed to regulate the trust and company service providers under the Section 32 of the OECD's proposals for reform of the financial system. All this stuff really matters because this is the battleground. This is what Russia is doing. And China's doing it too, but Russia's doing it now. China will be doing it tomorrow. And we need to find out ways of dealing with this stuff. We need to find out ways of investigating it. We need to find out ways of curbing it through regulation. We need to find out ways of investigating it through our intelligence services. We need to find out ways of prosecuting it. And if we prosecute it, we may not be able to deliver convictions, which is traditionally the benchmark for success in our criminal justice system. We may need to approach it like terrorist finance, where the goal is not a prosecution, the goal or the conviction, the goal is disruption. So I think that's going to be the next front line of the new Cold War. It's going to be economic, it's going to be financial, it's going to be legal, where economic, financial and legal overlap. And it's going to be a very tough battle. I think it's going to be much harder than it was trying to get countries to raise their defence spending. It's going to be much harder than it was trying to get people to understand that propaganda is a problem. It's going to be much harder than it was getting people to understand that energy is a problem. Because it goes to the heart of the way the West works. And it's not a pretty picture. And I'm very happy I've got a Ukrainian audience here, because I feel this really strongly. We are very good in the West at lecturing you, and countries like Moldova and Bulgaria and all these other countries, about corruption. And we say, set up your anti-corruption prosecutor and do this and do that and all this sort of stuff. And this is no doubt good advice. It's well meant and probably things would be better if you took the advice. But I always feel really uneasy about this, because all this corruption works because it has its roots in the West. When someone like Yanukovych steals money, okay, they buy gold toilet seats and 25 televisions and they fit out Nigeria in this kind of grotesque vulgarity. But that's just a tiny little bit of the story. There's a limit to how many gold toilet seats even Mr. Yanukovych can have. What he really does with the money is he invests it abroad. And how does he invest it abroad? He invests it abroad because of corrupt bankers, lawyers and accountants in the West, and because of loopholes in the Western financial system. If you read Oliver Bullow's brilliant book, Moneyland, this is the idea that there is a country called Moneyland, which is a special country for really rich people, rich, corrupt people. It's the sort of the republic of the technocrats. And Moneyland is a kind of invisible, but there's little gateways into Moneyland, which you get into Moneyland going through law offices and banks and accountancy firms, and in places like St Kitts and Nevis and the British Virgin Islands and Delaware and so on. And Moneyland exists at our expense. It's all money that's stolen from us. And Moneyland exists also because the West lets it exist, because it's very lucrative. People make a huge amount of money as bankers, lawyers and accountants servicing this sort of corrupt, invisible country called Moneyland. And we need to attack that. We need to attack it really hard. It's bad for you because the money is stolen from you and invested in Moneyland. It's bad for us as well because there is a political lobby in our countries now, whether it's in America preserving the extraordinary rights of Delaware to create these invisible companies where you have no idea who owns them, or in the City of London handling these enormous offshore flows, or in Vienna, with the banks in Vienna who seem to specialise in being servicing clients like Mr. Firtasch and so on. But all these people have political weight in the West and they want to defend their privileges. So it's a big battle, and it's a battle for your security interests, but also for our security interests. So I'm reminded of the old slogan, the slogan from the revolt of 1863, which was for your freedom and arms, vaše i naše svobody. And I think we need to update this. We still care about freedom, but what it's really about now is integrity. It's about your integrity and ours. You can't have the integrity in your system while our system is corrupt. While our system is corrupt, it makes it really hard for you to have integrity in your system. So I think that is the new front of the new Cold War. There's other things we can talk about as well, but I think that's going to be a 10, 20-year battle that lies ahead of us, and it'll be wonderful to have Ukrainian journalists asking really difficult questions and doing investigations and highlighting the way all this stuff works.
I have a question. Thank you so much. It's open for your questions, but if I may, Edward, ask the question about sanctions. All the sanctions that were supposed to have such impact. They've had some impact, but clearly not enough. How would you change them?
Well, I'm a bit sceptical about sanctions, really. I think the sanctions are very easy to impose, and there's a kind of feel-good factor when you impose sanctions. You think, now we've done something. And mostly, I think sanctions are a substitute for a real policy, rather than policy themselves. I'm in favour of very highly targeted sanctions. So I don't believe in saying, we aren't going to buy Russian oil anymore. Because all that does is creates opportunities for corrupt people to get around sanctions. You create a wonderful industry called the sanctions-busting industry, where the most corrupt people in the West and the most entrepreneurial people in Russia get together and find a way around the sanctions, and they get rich. We still feel good, but it doesn't actually. And it makes you transfer a little bit of wealth away from the shareholders of the Russian companies that you've sanctioned into the pockets of the middlemen who bust the sanctions. But as the middlemen are probably also the people who own these Russian companies, it's not really doing very much. So I'm kind of, I think we can do a bit. I'm in favour of making life difficult for Russian banks, particularly. I'm in favour of, but on the whole, the sanctions we really need are the politically painful ones, and those are the ones we don't do. So what we could have done is said, for example, that we're not going to have corrupt Russian companies listed on Western stock exchanges. That would be a really good sanction. Sorry, Mr. Deripaska. Ian Plus is no longer going to be listed on the stock exchange, and no Western institutional investor is going to touch your shares. That would be a really good, serious sanction. Oddly, we didn't do that. The London Stock Exchange was against that one. We could say to big Western banks, you can't take these people on as clients. That would be a really good sanction. Oddly, the banks are quite good at pushing to make sure that didn't happen. We could say to big Western law firms, you can't represent these companies in litigation in the West. That would have been a good sanction. The law firms pushed back quite hard on that. So we ended up with these kind of Potemkin sanctions that look good. And nice politicians say, we've been very tough, we sent a message to Russia. But actually, not sure. What sanctions should we have? We should have very targeted visa sanctions. We should say to the top 1,000 or top 10,000 people in Russia, so every member of the Duma, Federation Council, MVD, NCHS, obviously intelligence services, anyone who works in the presidential administration, all these people, we say, sorry, you can't come to the West anymore. You can't have bank accounts in the West, you can't own companies in the West, and not just you, your spouses.
Your families.
Well, it's tricky this, because I worry if, what do you do about the rebel children of senior officials who hate everything their parents stand for? So I worry about going, I think probably we have to do it, but I do it with a heavy heart, because I personally know people who are the children of of very, very bad people in Russia who are not on speaking terms with their parents, hate what they do, and are actually, as far as I can see, working on the right side. So I'm cautious about this. I think I'd go for spouses. I think spouses is a good step, and possibly parents. But I worry about going after the children, but maybe on a case-by-case basis. I don't know. But hit them with very targeted sanctions. But I think the real sanction I would like to see is going after the enablers. I would like to go after the bankers, lawyers, and accountants. And I would like to scare them. I'd like them to think, I was Deripaska's lawyer. I handle a lot of his transactions. I've just had this letter saying that I may need an extradition lawyer. I may be going to be extradited to the United States. And when I get to the United States, I'm going to face prosecution on some American law that I didn't even know existed, of wire fraud or some technicality. And I'm going to be facing a choice, a plea bargain of either 5 years or 50 years in jail. Now that, if you're a British lawyer or accountant or banker and you get that sort of letter, that is not a little hiccup. That is probably the worst thing that ever happened in your professional life. When we start making people like that really scared of extradition, and then we say to them, alternatively, you could just tell us what you've been up to, then we start getting somewhere. So I think that the most powerful sanctions, the ones that we impose on bad people on our side, are ones that involve pain for us, damaging the business models of people who provide financial and other services to the bad guys. Some question, a lady there.
Just wanted to clear something up. Did you just say that you were Deripaska's lawyer?
No,
This was for example.
This is a hypothetical. So if someone said, if I am Deripaska's lawyer,
Sorry, because I was like, wait, what?
No, I'm not even a lawyer. I'm not even a lawyer. Never named Deripaska's lawyer.
Okay.
No. This is a hypothetical. I want to put myself in the position of someone who's Deripaska's lawyer, and then work out what is the worst thing that could possibly happen to someone in that position. And I think the threat of extradition is a pretty big one.
I think that's like the smallest that can happen if you're a Deripaska's lawyer. The extradition wouldn't be the worst thing happening.
Well, I actually know Deripaska's lawyer. She's a lady, very senior British barrister, and I sat opposite her at dinner, and she referred to him as Oleg. She should have obviously said Oleg because that's Russian. She called him Oleg. She had no idea that he killed people. I mean, I say kill people. He's alleged to have been involved. I'm aware of it. Obviously, I don't mean literally that Deripaska killed people. She had no idea of the allegations that surround Mr. Deripaska's previous business career and the reason why he can't get a visa to the United States. I think who's in charge of the recording here? So just delete that little bit because he's very sensitive about these allegations. Usually I can't imagine. But, yes, that's another question.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for your for sharing your observations and thoughts on this very complicated issue. And so, in your speech, you said that 15 years ago, Russia and its power were not as strong. So, absolute majority of politicians and just ordinary people would laugh at an issue of danger that is about to come from Russia's side. So, my question is following. In your opinion, how Russia managed to develop their power in the world in such a short historic period of time, about less than 20 years of time?
Well, I think there's 3 points I make. First of all, this isn't new. Russia was doing bad stuff in the 90s. It's just because Russia was weak then, and they were mainly doing it in countries like Moldova and Georgia, Ukraine, Baltic states. These countries were warning the West back in the 90s, and the West didn't listen. The West said, well, we're not really familiar with this issue, and if it's happening, it's probably your fault. Why didn't you treat your own Russians better, and then Russia wouldn't be mad at you, and other kind of stupid, patronising answers. And so one thing that's happened is that Russia's got a lot stronger. Putin and the ex-KGB regime consolidated power. And so instead of just having to worry about the Russian intelligence services, which are the ones that were doing this stuff, we now have to worry about everything. So there was a real consolidation of state power. under Putin. They paid off all their debts, the oil price went shooting up, they had more money than they knew what to do with, they were able to raise defence spending. So that was one thing, they got stronger. Secondly, they got more sophisticated, that they realised that they could do stuff like cyber and info ops in a much more subtle and effective way. They used to do propaganda in a pretty straightforward Soviet way. They would say, Russia's great patriotic war, Sputnik, Gagarin, industrialization, Russia, great country. And it was basically a kind of very old-fashioned, it worked with elements of the Russian minorities in the Baltic states, this sort of stuff. Let's all go and celebrate May the 9th together. And that was okay up to a point, but it had no resonance in the West. What they've now realised is that the most effective propaganda is much more sophisticated. It's not about saying that Russia's great, it's about saying that the West is crap. And that's the main message of RT. It's that the West is, everything's rubbish, don't trust your leaders, don't trust your media, you're being lied to, all sorts of bad things are happening everywhere, and most of the time you're not being told about them. So this kind of general corrosive doom and gloom approach is absolutely that's central to the way that RT operates, and it's pretty effective. And this gets on to the third thing. The real reason why Russia is doing well is the West's in a mess. And the West's in a mess for, I would say, three big reasons. One is that globalization left a lot of people behind. So there's a lot of people who say, my living standards have gone down, everyone else is getting richer, I'm getting poorer or staying the same, I feel left out of the economic and political and social system. A lot of those people voted for Trump and voted for Brexit and voted for other, so that's one thing. Then you have the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan, particularly Iraq, where the people who run the West said, we have to do this, it's really important and it'll work. And it turned out that Saddam Hussein didn't have weapons of mass destruction, and we created an absolute catastrophe and gave birth to a huge terrorist problem. So that destroyed the credibility of the kind of West as a security actor in the eyes of many Westerners. They said, why are we sending our kids off to go and die in these wars that should never have been fought in the first place and which we can't win? So that was the second big thing. Then the third thing was the financial crisis. So even if you accepted that one of the effects of globalization was a lot of people were going to be rich and a lot of people were going to be poor, then when we had the financial crisis in 2008, it turned out that you didn't even have people really getting rich, because the system blows up every now and again and the bill goes to the taxpayers. So that really destroyed the credibility of the sort of Western governing elite in a way that we've made no steps really to recover. So we had three big self-inflicted wounds. Nobody made us do this. We decided to do globalization this way, we decided to do the Iraq war, and we decided to have a financial system that blows up every now and again. And that creates very fertile ground for the Russians to attack. Now, you're absolutely right, Russia is still not a very strong country. Russia is about the size of Italy in economic terms. It's got a pretty much stagnant economy, it's not diversified, infrastructure's rubbish, demographics are bad. Russia should not be really a serious problem. It's a serious problem because we're in a mess, rather than because Russia's strong. China is a different issue. China is a serious country and is going to be, and deserves to be treated as a serious problem. And in the long run, I'm much more worried about China than I am about Russia. Yes,
in addition, just I read one commentary about, I read one article about Russia as of today, and so actually there was said that during these times of Soviet Union, there was like the Soviet Union spread the idea, like they spread their idea, they had idea, and they like didn't try to destroy the idea of the West. There was like confrontation of these ideas, but actually now Russia doesn't have any idea of theirs, and actually they try just to destroy the idea of West and try to undermine this credibility to these terms.
Well, that's a huge, an interesting question which we could spend all day talking about. But very briefly, I think there is a kind of Russian. I mean, I think there's several different Russian ideas. There's the idea of Eurasia, Eurasia, which is a kind of supranational, anti-Western project based on a idea of sort of very limited democracy and very strong state sovereignty, and that's which sees Russia as a sort of it's a kind of anti-liberal project. The idea that Russia stands for the opposite of Western liberalism, so social conservatism, solidarity, sobornost, the Russian word. There's also the other idea of Ruski mir, which is a much more ethno-nationalist idea, that this is all about being Slavic and Orthodox, and that's not a supranational idea, that's very much a sort of Russo-centered idea. And there's also a dose of Soviet nostalgia, particularly the idea that the defeat of Nazi Germany gives some kind of sacramental, spiritual, special quality to Russia that can never be taken away. There's a bit of some other elements as well. So I think there are different contradictory ideas, but then Soviet communism was also quite contradictory. I actually studied Marxism Leninism back in the 80s, probably one of the very few Westerners who actually studied Soviet ideology. And even in Soviet ideology, there were very serious questions about, clearly this hasn't gone very well so far, so where did we go wrong, to put it mildly. But your question's excellent. You may have to follow up by email and get more answers there. Yes.
Okay, and I want to add about the Russian Soviet nostalgic and this quality, like they are winners of Second World War. So I was in Germany recently, and there was a celebration of unity of Germany, the west part and the east part, yeah. And there was a tent with the Russian, American, and I think the British flags, and they were like scanding like, "Hey, we are winners, not you, not you." No, remember that. It was on the day of the Germany unity. So and there was Russian people there, some. So yeah, okay. And my question is, you said you don't believe in sanctions, but do you think the American sanctions, which are touching this political elite and friends of Putin in Russia, how to say, split the Russian elite, and some people will hate Putin, and maybe some people.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, when I say I'm against sanctions, I'm against these kind of sectoral sanctions, particularly on sanctions on exports. I think they really don't work. I'm in favour of targeted sanctions on the elite. And I think in the short term, they may push people closer to Putin, because if you have to leave the West, you can't live in the West anymore, it pushes people back to Russia. So I don't think that they're not kind of magic. This is not Harry Potter stuff where you can just go whoosh sanctions and the other falls over. But I think you have to make them realise that there's consequences. And I would say that the central principle of the central element of Russian political discourse at the moment is anti-Westernism. The West is bad, the West is weak, the West is decadent, the West is hypocritical, and the West is a threat. Now, how you put all those together, I don't know, but that's the central thing. And I think you then have to say to people, okay, you really hate the West. Yeah, Mr. Kisilyov, there you are, every Sunday night on Vesti Nedelia, I watch you, saying the West is rubbish. Please explain, why do you have a flat in Paris? Why do you have a bank account in London? Why do you own a company in America? So all that's going to change now. You hate the West, you've got to really hate the West. Follow the logic of your consequences. So I think that helps. But I don't think it's magic.
Yeah, I will maybe. Okay, so I'm talking about that sanctions, American sanctions list of the people who were oligarchs and they are oligarchs. So and they close to Putin made that sanctions. Maybe these people will think, okay, maybe it's not so good to work with Putin, maybe I will be against Putin, and maybe there will be like a change.
Well, I think I just answered. I think in the short term it may push them closer.
Okay, close.
In the short term it pushes them closer, but I think for the next generation of people as they come up, if you're an ambitious young Russian in your 30s and you have a choice, you could go into public administration, work in the Kremlin, and you will end up like Mr. Kozak or someone like that. But there's also a good chance you're going to end up on a Western sanctions list. Your children may have difficulty getting visas. You're putting all your all your chips on one part of the board. Or you say, well, actually, I could also go and work for a big Western company. I could basically separate myself from the regime, keep my distance. We want to create an environment in which the next generation of Russians think, you know, I don't want to be associated with these gangsters. And I think that's in a way is the point of the sanctions.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Yes, sir?
Thanks a lot for outlining the importance of economical issues, and I would like to shift our focus more to like social media issue you outlined before. So don't you think it would be same for British government to I don't know, to start some regulations more on social media, on other means to influence public opinion before the economic issues is solved? For example, if we were talking about China, I can easily tell that China is secured from foreign propaganda because their social media is fully regulated by the government. And I would like to know if it is possible, for example, for British government or other democratical countries to make more like strict laws to eliminate the influence of propaganda on public opinion.
It's a great question, and I think you touch on a really difficult issue, which is to defend ourselves against Putinism, we need to change the way we behave. But if we make those changes and we become more like Russia, then Putin's actually won. So what I call self-Putinization is a real danger. And you see it all over the place where people say, I don't like Russian television, so let's ban Russian television. And I think there's definitely a case for banning Russian propaganda channels. I think it should be the last resort rather than the first resort. But if you go down the road of saying we're going to ban Russian media, we're going to ban Russian, maybe not just electronic media, but print media, we're going to ban Russian social media networks, we're going to ban Russian social media accounts, you are step by step, you're in danger of replicating the kind of Chinese model. And I don't really want that. I think I'm in favour of regulations. And I think if you break regulations, then there have to be penalties. So I think it's absolutely right. Now, we have this Iranian propaganda channel called Press TV, which is really revolting. If you think Russia RT is bad, Press TV is really, really bad. And they had a British journalist who was arrested in Iran who'd been tortured. And after this person was tortured, they were then put on Press TV speaking English to make their confession. So this is a really bad channel. So we blocked Press TV. And we have a media regulator who can do that, and they said this is outrageous and you're blocked. They've reprimanded RT for breaking our balance rules, and if RT continues to break the rules, then eventually RT will be banned. But I think it's one should always try and make this that you have to start by saying what are the best rules that we can have, not how do we ban these people. And I think what I want to do is to say to these social media companies, you have to make it a lot easier for your users to differentiate between real people and fake people. Because at the moment, if I get a Twitter request, someone to follow me, or a Facebook friend request, it's quite hard for me to know, is this guy with a name that I don't recognise a real person, or is it a Russian troll? Is it a Russian troll who's going to try and get onto my timeline and put stuff on there to mislead me, or is it just a friend? Twitter has the blue tick, which is a good start, but it's very limited, the blue tick. Most people on Twitter don't have blue ticks. So I don't know, am I following a real person? And I want to have that right. If I go into a shop and buy water, I want to be able to, to look at the bottle, and there's, I never actually read it, but there's kind of stuff down here in the small print that says this water is okay to drink. And that's the law. I like that. Now, if I want to, I can go down to the river and drink water from the river. That's my choice. I mean, I'll get sick, but it's my choice. I can do that. And I think social media is the same. You've got to give people the assurance that at least they're dealing with real people. That's the first thing. Similarly, on the web, I think you need to have much clearer ideas about whether the sites you're visiting are real sites or not. Because at the moment, if I want to, I can set up a site called, uku.org.uk, which will look, because UK and UA are pretty similar. I could set up a fake uku site. I could do it pretty much from my phone, certainly from my laptop. I could do it in a couple of hours, probably even less. I could buy the hosting with Bitcoin. I could do the web design myself. I can pay someone with Bitcoin. I can just take screen grabs from the uku website, and I can make a website that will look pretty much like the uku website. If I got my kids to do it, it would look even better because they're really good at this stuff. And I could start making propaganda, anti-uku propaganda. I could say we are having the, Bandera scholarships for the promotion of anti-Semitism. And I could do stuff that would look sort of, to an outsider would look pretty credible. Sort of, and it would be really bad for uku and really bad for Ukraine, and it would be completely legal. There'd be nothing anyone could do to stop it. So I want to have a way of signing websites for authenticity that says this really is uku. This is a real place with a real address, real buildings. And if there's some other thing that claims to be uku, it's got to be pretty clear that this is maybe it's a parody website. Maybe you guys have just set it up for a joke, or maybe for your journalism project or something. That's fine. I'm not against people being anonymous on the internet. I'm not against people doing parody sites. I'm not against people doing any of this stuff. But it's got to be more clearly labelled. So I think if we can label the people and we can label the websites in a way that makes you know, am I drinking good Ukrainian, where's it gone? Am I drinking Ukrainian mineral water or am I drinking river water? I need to have that choice as a consumer. And then I think we set up a sort of, it creates a kind of ecology in which good information and real people have a chance of getting ahead of the bad information and fake people. I think let's have questions from people who haven't asked questions already. Just
anyone else?
Yeah. Only you. No, the lady over there, Ms. Strabisher.
I have actually a couple of questions. Maybe they will be a little bit silly, but anyway. First of them will be about Brexit and Russian influence. Can you comment it? The second one will be about Western countries and their willingness and if they enough independent to push the real sanctions against Russia. And the third one will be about how the Western countries and especially Great Britain have dealt with oligarchy, because every country has kind of oligarchy, internal oligarchy. So three questions.
Okay, well let me do them in reverse. So I think the second and third ones are kind of related. And this is really what my talk was about. I was saying we have to get to grips with the power of dirty money in our own system. We have to do that because it's dirty money is the way that the Russian elite makes its savings. This is how they secure their financial future. Dirty money is the way in which they corrupt other countries, and dirty money is the way in which they corrupt us. So for three reasons, we need to be much tougher on the dark side of our own economy. And we need to be saying to people, sorry, you can't buy, for example, you can't buy real estate through an anonymous company. I mean, if you turn up as one of, like Yanukovych, and you have a company registered in the British Virgin Islands, and you want to buy property in London, we should say no. We need a living, breathing, flesh and blood person here. You cannot buy property just through ABC Limited of British Virgin Islands. You've got to be a real person. I think we should extend that and say not only you can't buy property, you can't sell property. So if you have, some Ukrainian oligarch owns some vast flat in London, £20 million flat, and they want to sell this, they can't sell it through their shell company. They have to turn up and say, yes, this is me, Mr. Akhmetov, in short, whatever the name is. And so we should also say that you cannot even own property through a shell company. So after 5 years, if you don't produce a living, breathing, flesh and blood person, then this property will go back to the Treasury. It doesn't belong to you anymore. So we have the right to push back on this, and I think this would be good for us and good for you. Are we there yet? No, we're just beginning to get to grips with this. We're beginning to get the legal mechanisms in place. There's great books coming out, the media is turning its attention to it. So compared with 10 years ago, this is very good, but we are not there yet. And these people are lobbying very hard on the other direction, so I don't think it's going to be easy. On Brexit, I think that there's clearly room for investigation here. Where did Aaron Banks get his money from? This guy was effectively bankrupt. He made the largest donation in British political history to the Leave campaign. It's a completely reasonable question. Where did you get your money from? He says, I found it. Actually, he didn't. He said, my company mined some diamonds, which is the equivalent of my diamonds. Okay, well, you just produced diamonds from a diamond mine in South Africa that hasn't produced any diamonds for 10 years. And suddenly you get millions and millions of pounds in diamonds. Now, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to think, diamonds, diamonds. Who else produces diamonds? Russia produces diamonds. So maybe are these diamonds actually Russian diamonds rather than South? These are reasonable questions to ask. And I would like to see in Britain an inquiry like the Mueller inquiry in America into Russian interference in our political system. In fact, I mean, the Mueller inquiry operates in secret, but I can tell you that the Mueller inquiry is spending a lot of time in Britain. They are doing a better job investigating Russia in Britain than the British are doing investigating Russia in Britain. So a lot of the American connections that they're investigating have roots in Britain. But there's a big but here. I don't think we lost the Brexit referendum because of Russian interference. We lost the Brexit referendum, I say we, I mean the Remain side, because we were rubbish. We lost the Brexit referendum because David Cameron wasn't willing to fight it properly. He put the unity of the Conservative Party ahead of winning the referendum. We had the same stale, pale, male figures running the referendum campaign who run everything else, and the public doesn't like them. We never engaged in the reasons why people were fed up with all sorts of things that weren't to do with the European Union. So it'd be too easy to blame Russia for Brexit any more than you should blame Russia for President Trump. These are real voters, and they have real reasons for doing the way they did, and we didn't do a good job in persuading them otherwise.
I think we should thank our guest.